So I want to give a little warning, maybe it's a trigger warning, that some of what we're going to talk about can be deep. I feel like we have to talk about the dark stuff so we can get to the light stuff. If you do find yourself triggered, we have multiple providers in the room that are here to provide support, so please make sure that we get you the support that you need if any of this can be a little bit much. I grew up in the system in Albany County. I was born to an emotionally and mentally unavailable mother. I was actually conceived in the closet after a spin the bottle game at a party, so it started off great there. My mother used to drop me off at the neighborhood church, and the congregation families would take turns taking care of me and my brothers until she would come back to get us. And there was different times when the foster care would come in. We were at different foster homes, and I grew up also in different group homes, and I lived for several years in a residential treatment facility. Every time that there was court, I always asked to go back with my mother. I always wanted to be with my mother and my brothers. So it was this back and forth thing pretty much my whole childhood. At the age of 8, I lost my virginity to her husband. When the police arrested him when I was 12, my mother was furious. She was furious at him initially, but it didn't take long for her fury to shift to me, telling me that I was trying to steal her husband. So when I heard him on the phone speaking to another firefighter saying that skinny women are unattractive, I thought that that was my answer. And that began my nearly 30-year battle with anorexia. As a preteen and as a teen, in between being in the system, I was also hospitalized multiple times for my eating disorder. And at each of those places, it requires 100% meal completion in order to have any privileges, such as calling home to my mother or brothers. So I really pushed myself to have that 100% meal completion, even though that was so hard for me, until a dear friend taught me a trick about throwing up after I ate and how it's the best of both worlds. I could get my meal completion and then get it out. And that began my purging addiction. What made my eating disorder so strict and so deep were the same things that made me a great sailor. So I remember going to speak to a recruiter, and he told me that the Navy is like a family. And that was all I ever wanted. So I said, sign me up. 20 years. And then I heard that chief petty officers call each other brother and sister. And I said, I will be that. Have you sisters in the house? Chief petty officer sisters? Oh, I see a couple of them. Yes, I said I will be that. And I did. But I thought I was in recovery, and it didn't take long for me to figure out that I actually was not. It was that first PRT, the BCA, the weigh-ins, and I was close. I was close to not passing, but I didn't want to just pass. I wanted to be the smallest version of myself. And sometimes I realized that that was disordered, but then I also looked around, and there were so many people around me also shrinking their bodies for these weigh-ins. And you can go to any Navy base or any base really, or aircraft carrier in preparation for the PRT and see all kinds of disordered behaviors that we've normalized over the years. I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of like Hunger Games meets Biggest Loser with a side of laxatives, right? It is, and you see people wrapped in hemorrhoid cream and saran wrap and doing anything they can just to not fail by half an inch or half a pound. You don't want your whole career to go away for that. And so those things that drove me into my eating disorder also made me a wonderful sailor. For the first 10 years of my career, I really didn't tell anybody about my eating disorder. I definitely kept it a secret. I know that my husband knew and he wanted to be supportive, but I definitely didn't allow that to be a conversation in our household. It was just my struggle, and I kept it to myself. I would try different times to kind of test out leadership to see if they could handle something like this, something so stigmatized, taboo, heavy, and most of the time, they really just couldn't. Either they averted the conversation or I averted the conversation. They would ask me, some questions that scratched at the truth, like, we don't really see you eat. And I would say, well, I'm intermittent fasting, and that's acceptable, right? They assumed 8 hours. It was actually 8 days. So as leaders, we have to know to ask those questions, right? When I became a chief petty officer at my 10-year mark, we learned about all of the different mental health resources that are available, and everywhere I looked, there was none for eating disorders. It was around that mark that I got stationed at the Expeditionary Combat Command, and I was just driving myself to be the best version I could, and running half marathons, ran a full marathon, and just pushing my body on very little energy, and my body gave out, and I ruptured my esophagus. I went to a civilian hospital so that it wouldn't get in my medical record, but my commanding officer still found out. And I got the message that I was to report to his office the next day when I got discharged. And I gotta say that a part of me was relieved. I had known this man my whole career and had so much respect for him, and I still do, and worked very hard for him. And I thought if anybody could help me, it would be him. So I walked to his office, and normally I would go straight to the couch each morning before quarters. That's where we would meet and talk. But before I got to the couch, he stopped me and stood me at attention in front of his desk. And he said, "There's no place in my Navy for you." He began processing me out. Sorry, I'm coming. I fought the discharge and I won. But I learned a very dangerous lesson. I learned that I had to keep it a secret. One more. I was doing my best to keep my mental health healthy, but I began suffering loss after loss. I began to see a civilian counselor who suggested to me that I should have a conversation with my mother, heart to heart, now that I was a mom, and just kind of have a maternal talk. So I went to New York, and I went to go speak with her, and I just kind of tried to say, without being accusatory, that you choosing a man over me relentlessly my whole life, it affected me and it hurt me. She got very defensive and she told me to leave the house before she called the cops. So I did. I went up to a bar up the street and just began taking shot after shot to numb the pain. Then my phone rang and it was her husband, and he just said she killed herself. And then I lost my beautiful niece, Kiana, who lived with us in the same way.
So I had to step up in the role of what I have to do for my family. I went to do research on how to manage a fund.
I also lost my mentor. The picture here in the middle was Command Master Chief Ron Shasky. Ironically, he helped write the Navy's policy on suicide prevention. He was my neighbor. He was my best friend's husband. He was my husband's best friend. And I was there the night that we discovered him in his shed. Navy leaders are not immune to crisis. No leaders are immune to crisis. But the show must go on, and I got orders to the world's best aircraft carrier, CVN-77. Woo-hoo. And I was so excited. I wanted to go to the ship from the very beginning. This was the ship that I wanted. Next slide, please.
Which ship is that for Air Force?
Oh, it's the George H.W. Bush, CVN-77. Oh, I was so excited. Listen, we can go back first. I packed that ship full of the best mass communication specialists, photographers, and because I was at Airland right before that, so I was at the TICOM. So I helped really build that ship up and get it ready for deployment, and then I was so excited when I got the orders to go take that ship on deployment. But because in my medical record I had a ruptured esophagus and mental health issues, they flagged my orders. And I had to go speak with the triad and request them to approve them. And there I met the Command Master Chief, and he was a short guy, but he packed a lot of punch, and he was a former medic, and he had a family member with an eating disorder. And he listened to me as I talked, and he said, "I'm gonna allow you to come to my ship, but there's gonna be some rules." Number one, you're not gonna hide behind your big smile and your work ethic. We're gonna talk about this. You're not allowed to purge on my ship, and you must get your labs done every week. I need to know how you're doing. And I agreed, and that's what I wanted. That was all that I wanted, which was fine while we were shoreside, right? And then we started doing workups. My answer to not purging, because at that point I was purging 8 times a day. My answer to not purging was I just simply wouldn't eat. Well, that didn't last into deployment, of course. I didn't last halfway through deployment when he and the triad gave me an intervention, and they decided to medevac me off the ship to come back to the States for inpatient treatment. I came back to the world's largest Navy base, and they knew that I was coming, yet there was nobody in that building that was eating disorder informed. Not a single provider in that building had had more than 15 minutes of eating disorder education. So I got bounced around to a whole bunch of crazy spots. That's stories for another time, before they finally found a place in North Carolina that would take me and that would take TRICARE. By the time we got there, I would live nearly 2 years on an NG tube, staying in that hospital. I remember the day that my treatment team met with my family, and they said, we have to discuss palliative care. Your eating disorder has been going for nearly 3 decades and seems to be treatment resistant, and we really just want to know how to make you comfortable for the end. That was my rock bottom, and that hit hard. And later that afternoon was art therapy session. I was already a disgruntled patient, but art therapy just seemed to bring out more disgruntled in me. I don't know, something about senior chief, like coloring. I don't know, we leave that for the Marines, right, Trina? I was kidding. But the assignment that day was to make a vision board placemat to be used during meals. And I thought, well, how stupid is that? Why would they want me to make a vision board when they just told me that they don't see a future for me? So out of spite, I decided I was gonna make that stinking vision board, and I was gonna put all kinds of random, far-fetched, sarcastic things on there. I put magical dream vacations, I put magical family moments, and just to be nice and sarcastic, I put, why don't I build a house where I can watch the Disney fireworks from my backyard? Next slide, please. Spoiler alert, every single thing on that vision board came true. So I turned my purpose into pain, and now I want to teach you how to do the same. Tip number 1, name your storm. Okay, you have to say it. You have to claim it. You have to talk about it. Up until that point, I couldn't say I have anorexia. I know that when people look at me that my body doesn't look like what you might think an anorexic body looks like. And that opens me up to stigma and judgment. Fact of the matter is that less than 6% of people with anorexia fall into the underweight category. So if you're looking to identify a loved one with anorexia and that's what you're looking for is skin and bones, you're getting it wrong 94% of the time. So I called Hubin, my mentor from the ship, the same guy that medevaced me, and I said, I need to do something different. I've done some research, and it turns out that 1/3 of females and 1/5 of males in the military have an eating disorder. Eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of all mental illnesses. We're doing so much to help the 22 a day, but we don't talk about the 1/3 of females and 1/5 of males with this struggle. I said, I want to do something, and he said, stop right there. And he called my bluff like he was so good at doing, and he said, you are not going to be able to heal or make a difference in the world until you can claim your pain and name it. Whew, that stung, as it usually, any good mentor can give you the bluff and sting it. So with a little bit of spite and a glass of wine in hand, I did what any good millennial would do when making a life-altering decision. I posted it on Facebook and Instagram. and LinkedIn. And I told everybody at the same time, I've had an eating disorder. All those years I was in the hospital, people just thought I was deployed. They didn't know that I was in the hospital. So I told everybody at the same time, friends, family, coworkers, shipmates, everybody got to learn at the same time. So that leads me to tip number 2. Chart your course. When I posted that on social media, so many people came out of the woodworks to talk. And they were so brave, and they were so bravely telling me their stories of, that's me, or that's my shipmate, or my sister, or my uncle, or my brother. And all of those conversations really led to the same place of, okay, I finally admitted it, I finally said it, so now what? And there just wasn't a now what answer. So, knowing that the number 1 cause of death for somebody with an eating disorder is suicide, and knowing that I've lost too many people to suicide, being a senior chief and being a mom, I decided to answer the now what, and I founded Sea Waves. Sea Waves stands for Support, Education, Awareness, Wellness, and Validation for Eating Disorders and Self-Care. We provide resources and referrals connecting our military community, active duty veterans, and family members with the resources that they need. We provide education to military leadership, helping them recognize eating disorders, the red flags, what they look like, some things that they've been saying that probably aren't helpful, some things they can say that will be helpful, and of course, how to get to resources. I also work on advocacy, working on getting TRICARE to cover inpatient and residential treatment. Right now, they do not cover that over the age of 21. So any of you that follow me see me probably going to DC often and trying to get that pushed through. Okay, number 3, shine your signal. Raise your hand if you remember the Care Bears. They're making a comeback, right? So if you remember the Care Bear stare, right? When something was just so dark that not one bear could handle it alone, they all came together and they shined their light together to make a lighthouse, really, in the dark for whatever the issue was. But if you remember, they each had a little something special on their bellies or on their shirts. And this is what I want you to think about. I want you to think, what would your Care Bear symbol be on your belly? And what would it stand for? For some of you, it might be a paintbrush or a music note. For me right now, it's a megaphone. And I'm telling my story, and I'm speaking on behalf of those that are silenced. And then tip number 4 is be the lighthouse. If you look on the table and you see different Sea Waves merch, and if you want more merch, visit our website. But on each of your dog tags, you see a QR code with the phrase, need a light, be a light. And I want you to remember that we say need a light, be a light with 2 different punctuations. Number 1 is with a semicolon. Raise your hand if you know what the semicolon stands for. It stands for your story doesn't end here. So you can read this as, if you needed a light, your story doesn't end. Be a light, and it will light your path. We also show it with a question mark. If you need a light, be a light. In other words, be the person that you once needed. Okay? If you needed a mother, be a mother. If you need a friend, be a friend. All right, ladies, help me out here. If you need a sister, be a sister. And if you need a light, be a light. Thank you all.